The Consumers Federation of Kenya was one of the groups that filed the lawsuit to stop the possible transfer of Kenyans' personal data under the new US-Kenya deal. It stated that Kenyan health data must be public and jointly supervised with consumer representatives involved in data monitoring and oversight. On Friday, Kenya's High Court issued an order suspending the agreement until the full case is heard. It also barred parties from sharing any data.
A court in Kenya has temporarily suspended the $2.5 billion health cooperation between Nairobi and Washington. The Nairobi High Court suspended with immediate effect the component of the pact relating to the transfer of health and personal data. The petition was filed by the Consumer Federation of Kenya, seeking to halt the agreement signed by the Kenyan government with the US on December 4. The 5-year $2.5 billion agreement with Kenya.
We hope to sign many of these in the days to come. But the first one we're going to sign is with Kenya. And the reason why is twofold. Number one, because of our close partnership. Number two, because they are they have stable and strong institutions, both in government and in the healthcare sector. And over the next few years, we're going to be investing $1.6 billion in health assistance over the next 5 years.
We'll take advantage of the people of Kenya as so long as I am president, because I am clear what we want, I am clear where we must go, and therefore there is no equivocation of whatever that the agreement we signed can undermine the interests of the people of Kenya, including matters to do with our health data. The Office of the Attorney General, and she's here, went through the agreement with a tooth comb to make sure that when it comes to matters data, the law that prevails on data that belongs to the people of Kenya is the Kenyan law. That is with...
The ruling arrived without spectacle, but its consequences echoed far beyond the courtroom. Kenya's highest judicial authority blocked a $2.5 billion US-backed health technology deal, citing unresolved concerns over data privacy, national sovereignty, and long-term control of sensitive information. What many expected to be a routine approval became a landmark decision that reshaped how developing nations viewed digital health partnerships. At the heart of the dispute was data, not hospitals, not funding, not infrastructure. Data. The proposed deal promised sweeping modernization, digital medical records, AI-driven diagnostics, cloud-based patient management systems, rural health connectivity. The scale was unprecedented, and so was the funding. For international observers, the agreement seemed like an unquestionable win. For Kenya's judiciary, it raised questions that could not be ignored. The court's reasoning was precise. Health data was not ordinary information. It reflected identity, genetics, behavior, vulnerability, and history. Once transferred, replicated, or analyzed beyond national jurisdiction, control became theoretical rather than real. The court argued that economic benefit could not override constitutional protections. That argument sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. In Washington, the decision was received with confusion. The deal had followed established frameworks. Similar agreements existed elsewhere. Yet Kenya's ruling suggested those frameworks were no longer sufficient. The assumption that technology partnerships were inherently neutral had been challenged. Inside Kenya, public reaction was complex. Some feared the loss of investment. Others saw the ruling as overdue. Civil society groups had warned for months that the deal prioritized efficiency over accountability. They argued that outsourcing health data risked creating a system where citizens became data sources rather than beneficiaries. The court agreed. The judgment emphasized that sovereignty extended beyond borders and resources. In the digital age, sovereignty included data, algorithms, and decision-making systems. Allowing foreign entities to control or process national health data without strict safeguards was described as a long-term risk disguised as short-term progress. The ruling did not reject cooperation. It rejected asymmetry. Kenya's health sector had evolved rapidly in recent years. Digital tools were already in use. Local startups had built systems tailored to regional realities. Universities trained data scientists and biomedical engineers. The court noted that innovation was possible without surrendering ownership. International investors reacted swiftly, markets reassessed risk, tech firms reconsidered expansion strategies across Africa. The ruling suggested that compliance would no longer be negotiated after implementation. It would be demanded before approval. For Washington, the setback was more than financial. It was reputational. The deal had been framed as partnership, yet the court interpreted it as imbalance. That interpretation forced a re-evaluation of how health diplomacy was conducted. Behind the scenes, U.S. negotiators sought clarification. Could the deal be revised? Could data be localized? Could oversight be shared? Kenya's response was firm but open. Cooperation was welcome, but constitutional limits were not negotiable. That distinction mattered. Across Africa, legal scholars took note. Kenya's ruling became a reference point in debates about digital colonialism, data extraction, and technological dependency. Countries drafting new data protection laws cited the case. Courts elsewhere studied its language. The health sector itself adjusted. Kenyan hospitals accelerated investment in domestic data centers. Encryption standards were upgraded. Regulatory agencies expanded capacity. The ruling had not stalled progress, it redirected it. Critics argued that the decision slowed modernization. Supporters countered that modernization without control was not progress. The court's stance reframed development as something that must be owned, not imported wholesale. The global health technology industry felt the shift. Contracts now included stricter clauses. Data residency became a core demand rather than an optional feature. African governments negotiated with greater confidence, backed by legal precedent. What unsettled foreign partners was not the rejection itself, but its justification. Kenya had not claimed mistrust. It had cited law. It had not appealed to nationalism. It had appealed to rights that made the ruling difficult to contest. Within Kenya, the decision strengthened public trust in institutions. Citizens saw the judiciary acting independently, prioritizing long-term national interest over immediate gain. The ruling became symbolic of a broader awakening that digital infrastructure was as critical as physical infrastructure. Months later, alternative proposals emerged: smaller deals, joint ventures, local ownership models, technology transfers instead of technology takeovers. The court's decision had not closed doors. It had changed who held the keys. Washington adapted slowly. Officials acknowledged that data governance had become central to diplomacy. Health aid could no longer be separated from privacy guarantees. Influence required alignment with domestic law, not circumvention. The blocked deal faded from headlines, but its effects deepened. Kenya's stance influenced negotiations in finance, education, and telecommunications. Data clauses became standard. Oversight mechanisms strengthened. The ruling also altered global perceptions of Africa. The continent was no longer viewed merely as a destination for innovation. It was asserting itself as a regulator of it. For Kenya, the lesson was clear. Growth did not require surrender. Partnership did not require imbalance, and development did not require silence. The court had not rejected technology. It had demanded dignity. In doing so, it revealed a new reality. The future of global health would not be built solely on capital and code. It would be built on consent, control, and constitutional clarity. The $2.5 billion deal remained unsigned, but Kenya had secured something far more valuable: the right to decide. In the months that followed the ruling, its true significance began to unfold far beyond the health sector. What had initially appeared to be a legal intervention soon revealed itself as a structural shift in how Africa engaged with the global digital economy. Kenya's decision did not merely pause a single agreement. It reset expectations. Government agencies moved swiftly to operationalize the court's guidance. New frameworks for data localization were drafted. Oversight bodies were expanded. Health institutions were required to map where patient data was stored, who could access it, and under what conditions it could be processed. Transparency, once treated as a technical detail, became a central pillar of governance. The domestic technology ecosystem responded with urgency and opportunity. Local firms, long overshadowed by foreign providers, found themselves suddenly relevant. Investment flowed into data centers, cybersecurity infrastructure, and health analytics platforms designed for local ownership. Universities partnered with hospitals to develop secure digital systems aligned with national law. What had been a perceived limitation became a catalyst. International partners adjusted cautiously. Some withdrew, unwilling to meet stricter standards. Others adapted, proposing joint governance models and shared control structures. These new offers reflected a changed balance. Kenya was no longer being sold solutions. It was defining requirements. The shift unsettled long-standing assumptions in global health diplomacy. For decades, aid-driven health initiatives had prioritized speed and scale over sovereignty. Kenya's ruling challenged that model directly. It argued that healthcare modernization without data protection was incomplete, and that efficiency without accountability carried hidden costs. Across Africa, policymakers paid close attention. Health ministries reviewed existing agreements. Legal teams assessed constitutional vulnerabilities. Data protection authorities gained influence. The conversation moved beyond funding levels to questions of ownership, consent, and future leverage. What made Kenya's position particularly influential was its restraint. The ruling did not accuse foreign partners of bad faith. It did not frame the issue as ideological conflict. It grounded its decision in law and long-term national interest. That clarity made imitation both possible and defensible. In Washington, the response evolved from frustration to recalibration. Officials acknowledged that the global landscape had shifted. Data was no longer peripheral to diplomacy. It was central. Future proposals emphasized compliance rather than convenience. The language of partnership became more precise, less rhetorical. The health sector itself transformed. Hospitals reported greater confidence in digital systems that were governed locally. Patients expressed increased trust in how their information was handled. Health outcomes improved not because of scale alone, but because systems were designed with accountability in mind. Critics continued to warn of lost opportunities. They argued that Kenya had delayed progress by insisting on control. Yet evidence suggested otherwise. Alternative investments arrived, slower but more aligned. Growth did not stall. It matured. The ruling also reshaped Kenya's international standing. Rather than being perceived as resistant to innovation, the country was increasingly seen as a standard setter. Conferences referenced its approach. Policy papers cited its framework. Kenya had positioned itself not as a barrier to technology, but as a blueprint for ethical integration. The most profound change was psychological. African nations had long been conditioned to believe that rejecting major deals carried unacceptable risk. Kenya demonstrated that risk could be managed, and that authority could be exercised without isolation. That realization reverberated across sectors beyond health. Finance ministries reconsidered fintech agreements. Education systems reviewed dead tech platforms. Telecommunications regulators tightened licensing requirements. The logic was consistent. Digital infrastructure was national infrastructure, and it demanded the same protection as physical assets. The global technology industry adapted unevenly. Firms accustomed to rapid deployment faced delays. Those willing to invest in compliance gained credibility. The market began rewarding patience over dominance. Over time, the block deal ceased to define the story. What mattered was what replaced it. Kenya's health system became more resilient, not through scale alone, but through governance. Data became an asset governed by public interest rather than private convenience. The ruling's legacy was not rejection, it was redefinition. Kenya had not turned away from cooperation. It had insisted that cooperation respect constitutional boundaries. In doing so, it changed the terms of engagement not just for itself but for others. Watching closely. The global system adjusted, as it always does, but this time it adjusted to African standards. The court's decision revealed a deeper truth about modern power. In the digital age, influence is not measured only by capital flows or technological reach. It is measured by who controls information, who sets rules, and who enforces them. Kenya chose to answer those questions decisively. The $2.5 billion deal was blocked, but something far more significant was secured. The principle that development must align with dignity, that progress must honor privacy, that sovereignty extends into the digital realm. Long after the headlines faded, the ruling continued shaping policy, partnerships, and perception. It marked a moment when Africa did not simply receive the future, it negotiated it. And by doing so, Kenya proved that true modernization is not about how much is offered, but about what is protected. The court had spoken, the system had listened, and the balance of power quietly shifted. Chat-gapped can make mistakes, check important info. Kenya's decision to block the U.S. health deal marked a defining moment in the global struggle between technological expansion and national sovereignty. What was rejected was not innovation, investment, or cooperation, but a model that treated data as a negotiable commodity rather than a protected national asset. In doing so, Kenya reframed the meaning of progress in the digital age. The ruling exposed a reality many had overlooked. Health data is power. It shapes policy, insurance systems, predictive analytics, and future markets. Surrendering control over it would have transferred influence quietly, permanently, and beyond public oversight. Kenya's judiciary recognized that such a trade-off, no matter how lucrative, carried consequences that extended far beyond balance sheets. The decision demonstrated that economic development no longer depends solely on access to foreign capital. It depends on the strength of institutions, clarity of law, and confidence to enforce them. Kenya showed that asserting legal boundaries does not repel growth, but attracts partners willing to engage on equal terms. The immediate aftermath proved this point. Investment did not disappear. It evolved. Smaller, more accountable partnerships emerged. Local innovation gained momentum. Public trust in digital health systems strengthened. Progress continued, but under rules defined at home rather than abroad. More importantly, the ruling shifted perception across Africa and beyond. It signaled that developing nations were no longer passive arenas for experimentation. They were active regulators of their own futures. The assumption that urgency justifies oversight gaps was dismantled. Kenya's stance did not isolate it from the global health ecosystem. It repositioned it within it. By insisting on data protection, transparency, and constitutional alignment, the country set a standard others began to study and replicate. What was once seen as resistance became leadership. The blocked deal will likely be remembered, not for its collapse, but for what replaced it. A new framework where cooperation respects sovereignty, where technology serves public interest, where progress is measured not only by speed, but by safeguards. This moment revealed a quiet shift in global power. Influence is no longer defined only by who builds systems, but by who governs them. Control of data, not just infrastructure, has become the new frontier of sovereignty. Kenya chose to protect that frontier, and in doing so, it made clear that the future of development belongs not to those who offer the most, but to those who decide the terms under which they accept it.